Good evening, everyone. Ooh, okay, we're hot now. How are we doing this evening? Welcome to Respond to Racism. My name is Bruce Poinsett, the Executive Director, and our screen is gonna come back. Yes. So welcome to our monthly community meeting. I'm really honored to have some of the team from It Did Happen Here in Antifascist People's History. And I'm gonna introduce our guests in just a second, but just a few housekeeping announcements. First of all, for those who are not familiar, again, we're Respond to Racism. We're a neighborhood effort to interrupt racism here in Lake Oswego. Our mission is to educate and empower Lake Oswego residents and institutions with the tools to combat racism in all its forms and make LO and Oregon a better place to live for residents of all races and ethnicities. So if you'd like to learn more, thank you. If you'd like to learn more about us, I encourage you to go here to respondtoracism.org. You can sign up for our email list. It's right on the first fold. Also, if you would like to donate, I'm just gonna do a little walkthrough. Go to this button here. And yes, to support the work, you can go right here. It's tax deductible, all that good stuff. So, a few other things. If you haven't checked out our blog, we've got some new exciting content as well. We have a new communications person, LOHS class of 2021, Cameron Izuka, and they actually did an essay of our last meeting with Amber Boydston, or inspired by our last meeting with Amber Boydston. It's called Reinterpreting Abolition with Audre Lorde. Highly recommend you check that out. Also, we have the latest interview from our Life After the Bubble series with Daniel Nsengimana, who also was recently published. And I'm just gonna plug his book real quick. It's called Children of the Sun. It's available online. Again, came from the schools here, support a young author. So, a few more announcements. We have a new landing page for the Gloria Brown Scholarship. So, Gloria was a member of our leadership team. She was also the first Black woman to serve in the U.S. Forest Service, or be the first supervisor, I should say, as a Black woman to serve in the U.S. Forest Service. And we'll be offering at least 4 $2,000 scholarships in her name to BIPOC students in LOH or in LO. So it's not just kids who go to LOHS or Lake Ridge, but if you also live in LO, reside in LO, you are eligible for this scholarship. So again, we're giving out at least 4, but if you'd like to donate so we could provide even more scholarships, again, you can donate here. You can find the Gloria Brown Scholarship. It's under our Get Involved portion of our page. And we got a couple more events coming up. So just talk about the scholarship, but we're doing a partnership with the Lake Ridge BSU to screen The Hate You Give on February 24th at noon. So highly recommend you come to that. It's also gonna be a fundraiser to support the BSU. I can just tell you as a Black student who grew up here, support these spaces, support the students trying to organize in these spaces. We're also partnering with Clackamas County Surge, which is showing up for racial justice, and the Clackamas County Equity Coalition for a community forum on March 2nd. Many of you have heard about the dismantling of the Clackamas County Equity Office. And while this is kind of like an impetus for us to all get together, the reality is the situation on the ground has been bad. And there have been people organizing, haven't really been getting the support, to be perfectly honest with you. And it's time for an even deeper discussion on how we can build and frankly just go on the offensive, because you got people doing Fox News spots and getting their message out to the world, crushing what little there is out here. And there's a lot of us doing great work, but now it's time for us to collaborate together. We've been operating in our silos, and that's not working. So Again, that's March 2nd. It's going to be from 1 to 3:30. There's going to be tabling with different community groups. So again, if you want to learn who's doing some of this work, not just in LO, but West Lynn, Gladstone, Oregon City, Clackamas, Boring, come through. It's a great time to not just network, but build our collective power. So again, that's March 2nd. It's called Envisioning After Dismantling, the Past, Present, and Future of DEI in Clackamas County. And then our next community meeting is going to be on March 11th. We do these every second Monday, and it's going to be with Sarah Sanderson and Taylor Stewart. So Taylor Stewart is the executive director of the Oregon Remembrance Project, and Sarah Sanderson is the author of, I should really have this up here now. Now I'm forgetting the title of the book, and I feel awful. Sarah, please, I hope you're not watching this. But we're also going to be doing a book giveaway as well, so highly encourage you to come to that. And with our announcements out of the way, I'd like to talk a little bit about our guests who are going to be speaking to you this evening. So It Did Happen Here, an Anti-Fascist People's History, is an independently produced podcast and a collectively written book about anti-fascist struggles that took place in Portland, Oregon following the 1988 murder of Ethiopian immigrant Mulugata Sarah by racist skinheads. This is the story of how disparate groups used a diversity of tactics to fight neo-Nazi violence and right-wing organizing in the Rose City in the 1980s and 90s. It Did Happen Here is the winner of the 2022 Oregon Heritage Excellence Award. Now, let me talk about our guest tonight. First, Selena Flores. Selena Flores is a media maker specializing in photography and video editing. She's trained in equity-informed mediation and values clear and concise communication in all forms. One of the co-hosts of the It Did Happen Here podcast, Selena also conducted research and interviews for the project. In her downtime, you can find Selena petting her kitties, baking, or playing drums in the band Viral Load. Next, I'd like to introduce Mo Bowstern. Mo Bowstern contributes to underground literary cultural traditions as a reader, writer, and editor, best known for the commercial fishing zine Extra Tough, which shares her life in the Alaskan salmon, halibut, herring, cod, and crab fisheries. After moving to Portland from 1997 to 2007, Mo gave her time to DIY's social justice projects, co-creating spaces for citizens to protest within the queer, fun-centered, anarchist, amalgamated, everlasting union chorus, and making a ceremony outside of mainstream capitalism with an annual mega collaboration, the Winter Solstice Puppet Show, among other projects. She earns wages and healthcare at a warehouse. You can find Mo's work at substack.com. And last, but certainly not least, Mike Crenshaw. Mike Crenshaw is an independent hip-hop artist, respected MC, poet, educator, and activist. Crenshaw is the lead U.S. organizer for the African Hip-Hop Caravan and uses cultural activism as a means to develop international solidarity related to human rights and justice through hip-hop and popular education. In his teenage years, Crenshaw actively confronted white supremacist gangs that were a growing part of the hardcore music scene. Mike eventually moved to Portland, where he quickly became one of the most respected artists in the Northwest, and his community efforts have had both local and international impact. Crenshaw is a co-producer of the It Did Happen Here podcast. So would you please join me in welcoming Mike, Selena, and Mo.
Hey everybody, thank you for having us. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Bruce. Thank you.
Can we hear all right up there?
Yeah.
Can you hear us? It's so nice to be here. We feel so lucky.
Yeah.
Check, check. Check, check. All right, good. Everybody in the back, up in the booth. Awesome. Hello to all the folks online that we can't see, but we know you're out there. Thank you so much for joining us. Should I just start?
Yeah.
My name's Mo Bowstern, and I co-wrote the narration for the It Did Happen Here podcast, and I also wrote a lot of the intros to the book and helped edit it along with everyone else. And my role in the history was adjacent to this experience. I was living in Chicago in the late 80s and early 90s. And I was organizing alongside people who were working with anti-racist action and fighting the white, violent, young, racist fascists and skinheads in the Chicago area. And I'm so lucky to be up here with everyone. Mike and I got to take the book to Chicago, Minneapolis, and Milwaukee in September. And we are planning for a tour in the southeastern states, Georgia, Virginia, Kentucky, North Carolina, possibly Alabama, in the springtime. So, and I also want to mention that Erin Yankee is here with us as well. She's the executive producer of the project, of the podcast, and one of our collective author members, and she'll be at the table with all of our merchandise. So she's helping tonight too.
My name is Mike Crenshaw, and I'm a co-producer of the podcast, as well as a co-editor of the book. I was working on a project that's an autobiography called Black Skinhead that chronicles my role in some of the formations that founded anti-racist action in the Midwest, one of which was the Minneapolis Baldies, which was a group of anti-racist skinheads. The work we did in the 80s and into the 90s helped influence what happened in Portland, Oregon in the wake of Mulugeta Serral's murder. We were the founding members of anti-racist action and built a network across the Midwest that eventually stretched out to Portland, Oregon. The work I was doing on my book was part of this effort to interview people in the Midwest and in Portland that I knew, that I was organizing with. And Erin Yankee and I both worked at KBOO at the same time, as well as Selena, and Mo is also in the KBOO community. Erin came to me when I was managing KBOO and said that there's a bequest, some money left behind for people in KBOO, producers, to produce a program or programming directed at fighting the religious right. And she wondered if we could use some of the content that I was gathering for my book to be part of this larger story that connected anti-fascist, anti-racist organizing and the history of it and what happened in Portland. And so that's when we started working together, and we brought in Mo and Selena, Julie Perini, and another brother named Icky, and we all co-produced the podcast. After the podcast was produced, PM Press offered us the book deal, and the book has been out for over a year. Here we are.
Yep. I'm Selena. Nice to meet you all. Sometimes I wonder how I got so lucky to be up here with these two, because they're like forces of nature. And I'm about 10 years younger than them, so I was a kid watching like Donahue and Oprah after school as a latchkey kid, and seeing neo-Nazis on the screen there. And I had an inherent knowledge that that was wrong, and I was one of the narrators, researchers, and I did a lot of transcription for the podcast. And for the book, I have a couple photos in there. A lot of the work I did for the podcast kind of went into the book with the transcriptions. So I'm so happy to be here, and thank you all for coming tonight.
So I think the three of us will just talk for maybe 20 minutes or so about different things in our relation to the book, the book's relationship to the larger social political climate in our country. But I think the most important part of what we're gonna do is dialogue as community. And that part, you know, we hope it might be a little bit longer than just us talking with you. So you all be welcome to contribute to the conversation and ask questions after a certain amount of time.
I really appreciated Bruce's introduction, especially when he was talking about, he was basically giving a call for us to come together and address in what you all are dealing with the end of the inclusion policy. I'm not quite sure what you guys are dealing with, but the book really plays into that call of stepping outside of our silos, because it really works with the understanding of a diversity of tactics. And the book holds the stories of several different groups, one of which was Mike and his friends and comrades from Minneapolis all the way out to Chicago and the West Coast, but also folks working out of Reed College, a bunch of students from Lewis and Clark who formed the Coalition for Human Dignity, and then folks from ACT UP and a couple of feminist organizers from the Lesbian Community Project. So it was a lot of different people working together under a big tent. Understanding, I mean, it talks about it in the book where some people were very much pacifists and refused, like had sworn off using any violence at all. And that was accepted within the group as long as people understood that they needed to bring their bodies into the fight. And there was also understanding and tolerance of and acceptance of like that there were young men who responded to different calls with violence, or young women too. And when I look around now, especially in different smaller groups or on social media, I see a lot of people on the left just sort of, we're just tearing each other apart. And so I really appreciate being included in a book that kind of corrals this history of everybody trying to work together in spite of our, and in the face of our many, many differences, and being able to be big enough to see that our fight is in common. And I'm gonna just close this comment with a quote from Bernice Johnson Reagan from a paper that she wrote called Coalition Politics, Turning the Century. And you can find this paper online. And it's a paper that she gave when she was speaking at a feminist gathering in, I think in Taos, New Mexico. And she was bringing out one of the things that's not included in this short quote was where she was talking about how she had never been, it's 10,000 feet above sea level where this paper was being presented. And she was like, I have health problems. Like 2 days into this conference, I can't think properly. And it really affects my experience. And she was calling on the great, organization that had called this paper to be like, we really need to pay attention to certain things when we invite people in. She's just like, I got invited to be here and I'm already can't function because I'm in this literal environment where I can't breathe. So that's you can read the paper online. But what she wrote was, coalition work is not done in your home. Coalition work has to be done in the streets. And it is some of the most dangerous work you can do. And you shouldn't look for comfort. Some people will come to a coalition and they rate the success of the coalition on whether or not they feel good when they get there. They're not looking for a coalition. They're looking for a home. They're looking for a bottle with some milk in it and a nipple, which does not happen in a coalition. So I think about that whenever I try and organize, and I feel in myself a little insecurity or a little need for reassurance, and then I just remember that just being in a space with people that you don't know, that you're willing to work together to bring liberation to you all is the work.
Yeah, it's good to be here. It's good to be welcome by Respond to Racism. You all are doing work here. Everywhere we're at is a front line of struggle, and it's a marathon. My best friends and I were doing the work when we were teenagers, not because adults told us to, not because somebody invited us to an event or a meeting, but because we had to face the immediate threat to our existence that was in our community. Being a black kid in Minneapolis, coming from the south side of Chicago, it was very clear that the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazis that they were aligned with didn't believe that I had a right to exist. They didn't believe that other people who were non-white had a right to exist. And they didn't believe that my white allies who were going to fight with me and stand up for me had a right to exist. That in and of itself, we understood as a form of violence because they are racial terrorists. And anybody that knows history understands that they've been murdering black people ever since black people have been in this country. They've been murdering indigenous people. They've been murdering Jewish people. They've been murdering our allies. And so what we saw as teenagers when we decided that we had to violently confront these people because they weren't going to change through ideological, philosophical conversations, is that when we went to face them, very often they were protected by the police. Very often they were protected by institutions that came down harder on us. And so that taught us a lot. And I think over the years it's become more nuanced. At the time in which I was willing to engage and put my life on the line with other people who are willing to do so, physically, there was a different level of understanding about the problems we face and how we had to solve them. As we got older, we became more wise. And I will never condemn self-defense, ever. But as I've grown older, I can understand that to confront every problem with physical confrontation isn't sustainable, especially when people have the state on their side. As we zoom out, we see that these nuances are actually integral to the structure of white supremacist patriarchy as a social institution, as part of the military-industrial complex that's funded by well-resourced capitalism that's been exploiting people for centuries. So the amount of wealth, weaponry, surveillance, technology, institutional, ideological support that that system has to function is what's behind the mass displacement of people in Palestine. It's what's sending billions of dollars in arms to Israel, to Ukraine. It's behind all the systems of oppression that underlie the climate crisis. And so when we say we're anti-fascist and anti-racist, we're actually able to understand that all systems of oppression are connected.
For sure. I just want to say that I think this is a really cool group, Respond to Racism. I'm just learning about it, and I live in Clackamas County, and I am excited to participate in this more. I think this is very exciting that this work is going on. So yeah.
I really appreciate you bringing up the way that all those things are tied together. I also want to say that when we say we're anti-racist, we're anti-fascist, we're pro-liberation for all beings. And that includes, for me, all humans and non-humans, the trees and the water. I agree with the ideas that are happening in South America where the water has rights and the forest has a voice. I'm looking forward to going to Atlanta and learning ways that we can support our comrades at Stop Cop City. Do you guys know about Cop City? Yes. There's a few people shaking their heads no, and there's some people shaking their heads yes, so I'm just gonna educate a little bit. In the Wilani Forest, I think that's how you say it, outside of Atlanta, or it's the Atlanta Forest. There's a big green space, and there is a proposed plan that's being pushed through by city developers and the police department to put in a huge police training center so that police from all over the region can come and be militarized even further. It's been there's been over 100,000 signatures collected by the citizens of Atlanta, collected throughout the entire region, opposed to the implementation of this. And the reason I bring it up is there was a young activist, what is Tort's last name? Tortuguita was his name, the little turtle, the little tortoise. And he was shot point blank and killed at a protest by law enforcement. And a year ago, it was about a year and a month ago or so. And it's just not getting out there very far. And it's a real intersection of like the desire to police people, especially black people in the South, the desire to control a wild space a forest space where people could possibly live outside the city, and the desire to bring that level of fascism to the entire region. And a place for police to practice their,
Oppressive tactics.
yes, thank you, their oppressive tactics. I'm trying really hard not to swear in the church. So when I pause, that's what's happening. I'm trying to reprogram. Thank you very much. So, I guess I just want to say, like, anywhere where those things are intersecting, there's a place for you to stand, you know, like, there's a place for everybody in anti-racism liberation work. And there's a place for all voices to speak up against the types of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism that's on the rise lately. Yeah.
Did you know, Mo, that I don't know if they've green lighted it, but there's talk of creating another cop city up in Lacey, Washington?
Oh, no,
Of course
I didn't.
there is, yeah.
Oh, and another piece is like, this is a way you can see our rights being taken away as citizens, because we keep being told we're in a democracy, and we just need to organize and protest, and that's what these young people have done. And one of the interesting things about Cop City is that there are people grassroots organizing in Atlanta, and then there are also different kinds of extra legal activities that are happening, sabotaging police cars and stuff. And we're calling on people to denounce that. And what I was seeing was people in Atlanta refusing to denounce things like the arson and the vandalisms, because they're like, we have tried to speak up, we have collected the signatures, we have collected the petitions, and yet there is no movement, and the people's will is not being respected. Nobody wants a police training facility in their backyard except for the police. So that was a little bit of a tangent, but
Not really.
I went on.
it's just kind of like bringing in this, like, I always think that it's a really boring rallying cry, but if we could end corporate personhood, that would go a long way towards freeing up a lot of ability for people to have, human beings to have greater power with our speech. Because right now, corporations' free speech is polluting, you know, the Cancer Alley in New Orleans and dumping stuff in all our rivers and lakes, so.
I don't feel that, you know, either of you are being tangential. I just see the interconnectedness of all these things. And, you know, as time has gone on, the ability to see the interconnectedness just gets sharper, right? Can you all relate to that? You know, and that's why, you know, for me, you know, this is real subjective stuff for me. I don't really talk about it in this like intellectual objective way, because being a black person that's descendant of people who were forcibly displaced, you know, through the transatlantic slave trade, being a working class person that's been exploited all my life through wage theft, trying to survive as an artist and having to work 5 or 6 jobs, it's all very personal to me. And, you know, growing up in a scene and having to fight against the broader progressive and liberal left for our right to use self-defense as one of our tactics was this ongoing thing that we still see today. In the wake of George Floyd, this same age-old conversation comes up when there's property damage, right? And people in the progressive, often white folks who are somewhat privileged and middle class, and the progressive left and liberals are gonna be like, well, you guys can't use you know, damage to property. You're gonna discredit your movement and people aren't gonna wanna support you. And I'm like, but you need to understand that the privilege that informs your ability to even say that indicates where you're at on the spectrum in terms of the safety of your existence versus the danger of my existence, right? And so if my life isn't worth as much as this empty building, right? It's empty more than it's actually housing people. And the people that are in that building are only maintaining the status quo through administrative tasks, right? So the whole purpose of the whole purpose of that building that is empty serves, that is being protected by 60 living police officers who are being paid time and a half to stand there and protect that building. That is more important than the person who lost their life, the unarmed person who lost their life, and not a cop goes to jail, not a cop serves any time, there's no legal consequence. These cops are on paid time off. So out of our taxes, like if you work and you get a paycheck, there's numbers on that pay stub that comes out of your check without your consent before you even get to put money into the bank that pays for the loss of life. And the same holds true for these bombs and these missiles that are hitting hospitals right now. So it's like we have to, in our diversity of tactics, there are some principles that I think we need to orient to. And that principle is I'm always going to stand with the most oppressed people. I'm always going to stand with the most vulnerable people. I'm also going to recognize my own limitations because I have to show up in the way that's authentic. If my limitations don't allow me to put my body on the line, I have to be okay with that. So I'm not going to beat myself up if I don't feel like getting hit by a crazy person who wants to run over pedestrians and get away with murder, right? If that's not something I'm willing to do, that's okay, but I need to figure out other ways that I can orient and put my energy towards the struggle. So I think with that last point I'm just speaking to, as we struggle together through diversity of tactics, we can't tear each other down through being judgmental about, well, you're not doing it as good as me, because that's a lot of what happens, and that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, when we're on the streets, we're caught up in a beautiful level of solidarity that is super physical, and we're just like, we get to feel like one entity. And there's ways that when we age out of that for whatever reason, or if our mental health or physical health impedes our ability to participate at that level, that we can step back, and part of us feels perhaps like, I'm not doing enough, so I'm just gonna judge them. And when I look at that in myself, I'm like, why do I need to judge them? Because I feel less than, because the only way I really know I'm participating, crying in the wilderness to be like, stop this, is when I can look around and see I'm part of a group of people. And in the years since I've become disabled in various ways, and I've had to, I had to sit out the 2020 uprising, the George Floyd protests. And it was a challenge. It was hard. I had to challenge myself, how am I gonna do this? And personally, what I ended up doing was writing a public post every night on Instagram, and I really asked myself every day, how can I frame my life? How can I identify a place where Black Lives Matter today? And really hold that question for myself in a public space. It didn't ever, I was something I was sending out by myself, and it didn't ever feel quite as real perhaps as when I was standing with my comrades in Seattle with the WTO back in 1999. But the waves of change and ripple that has, the way that has impacted people is, I am starting to understand, was real. And it's something I have to build up inside of myself. Our culture teaches us to get our reinforcements of self from the outside in, because that's how capitalism makes money, right? You feel terrible about yourself, buy a bag, buy a pair of shoes, get your hair done. Then, oh my gosh, I feel better for a week or a day or an hour. And we have to really work on being able to stand with what we believe in and not tear other people down at the same time. And I just think back to the early 90s in Chicago, what I was doing when my comrades were working with ARA, I was doing a lot of clinic defense. This is when Operation Rescue, which was a violent anti-abortion group, kind of rose up in the Midwest with Terry Randall. And they went on to murder several physicians, including Dr. William Gunn, during this time when we were organizing it. And I was part of a group of people that we would get on a bus at 3 in the morning and leave Chicago, or 3 or 4 in the morning, leave Chicago and go to the St. Joe Valley now in Indiana, in, that town. I can't remember the name of it, but they have the Fighting Irish,
Notre Dame?
Notre Dame. Thank you very much. And we would show up, and the St. Joe Valley Now organizers, who were a bunch of nice Midwestern pro-choice white ladies, would ask us to sign a piece of paper saying we wouldn't commit violence and we wouldn't chain ourselves to the doors. And none of us had any plan to do that. We were just there to support them. But none of us was willing to sign a piece of paper limiting our choices for the day. And so we had to protest on a different side of the fence from them. They would get donuts and they wouldn't give us the donuts. You know, like, it was petty. It was petty. And so, you just have to give everybody the pastries. Thanks for showing up. Eat the pastry, you know. And there's like a way in which we all have COINTELPRO on our minds. You guys know what COINTELPRO is? The counterintelligence program, where small groups and revolutionary groups and liberal groups are infiltrated by the CIA or the FBI. I guess it was FBI mostly, wasn't it? And they've taught us how to do that to each other. So we don't even, they're like, well, I was there and Mike didn't mention me and he didn't, and then we're tearing Mike Crenshaw down, and who wants to do that? I just want to lift you up.
Thank you, Lynn.
Anyway, that's a way that we can be revolutionary. It's just like, have curiosity, have neutrality, and especially if we see somebody that is saying something like, I feel like when we talk and criticize democracy and critique where we're at, especially in an election year, we also have to always include a caveat saying, like, no matter what we say up here, nobody is saying anything about voting. You can do whatever you want with your vote. You can vote for whoever you want with. We're not up here to debate that, because inevitably someone will come up to us afterwards and start arguing with us about this or that politician and our stance on it. And what we're saying is, like, voting is a diversity of tactics. It's a tactic. So all these things are tactics. I just wanted to get out in front of that one.
Word.
Can I say that I think that a lot of what you're saying also involves a certain amount of inner work so that you can show up and I'll say how I would do it. Be in a heart-centered space, be grounded, and kind of come in with an open heart and an open mind. So yeah, that takes some work.
So let's, are you good?
Yeah.
We can transition?
Yeah.
We're open for questions and comments. Yeah, anything that you all wanted to contribute to the conversation. Also, just to say that the podcast is available if you haven't listened to it. It did happen here, podcast.com. And there's a high school curriculum that we partner with Oregon Historical Society to create. That's available for free on the Oregon Historical Society website, so teachers can get this in the classroom.
And the curriculum is entirely podcast-based, so people don't have to spend money on books, although they are welcome to.
Anyways, okay, so the Q&A, myself and Sienna are going to be going around with the mic, so just, raise your hand if you have a question for Mike, Selena, or Mo. What about, nope?
You see that? I think sometimes there's a light that indicates on the side.
Hey,
Okay.
there we are.
There it is.
There we go. So yeah, we'll be roving around, and before we get into that, I should have plugged this earlier, but please check them out at the merch table. They've got books, other items over there at refreshments, so yeah, go get a book, go talk with the authors some more. Yeah, we'll be out here running the mics.
I was very interested and fascinated by the photos as you were talking, and I wondered if you could say a little bit more about them in the context Or maybe they're not part of something that you brought. I just wasn't quite following it.
Yeah, so this is a slideshow that Julie Perini, one of the co-editors of the book, and also somebody who did a lot of archival work to get the images together. A lot of us worked, I think it was a collective effort in terms of a lot of the images came from personal relationships, and Aaron might, be able to say something about trips that were taken across Oregon to dig through archival.
Are they in the book?
Yes, yeah.
Not all of them are in the book, but many, many of them are in the book, and some of them are also on the It Did Happen Here podcast website. If you go to the show notes.
Yeah.
And Julie Perini, who is one of the co-authors, is a professor at Portland State University in the video department, I believe. In the art department, but her specialty is video. And she, as Mike said, she was our image curator for the book. So there's ways, the authors of the book, all 6 of us, brought so many different things. It's kind of a cool spectrum of the diversity of tactics alone, with Selena's research at photography and her ability to navigate computers at a generation level that was beyond us. Mike is his personal experience. The book is very much his story, and the contacts that came to us because of the trust that people had in Mike made it so that we could make relationships with other people who were then, many people, this book is a really special story because people were sharing stories that they didn't want to tell people, that they, it could only be done in a place of trust. And Mike really brought that trust to the book for us in a lot of ways. And you already heard about me. Erin worked at KBOO. She's a stalwart in the punk community, has been organizing on some level since she was about 15 years old. And Alec Dunn, who co-wrote the narration for the podcast with me and also laid out the book and did the art direction of the book, is a harm reduction activist. He's a nurse, and he has been creating political graphics and art and graphic design for over 20, 30 years. So, and both Aaron and Alec and I are grounded in the zine community and the do-it-yourself zine community of the 90s. So, and Julie obviously comes from a radical art background, really interactive, really everyday artist. Like, how can we make art out of the everyday? She's doing a diary festival at the end of this month, and is in the university. It's great to have somebody on your team who can get into the ivory tower. So if you're gonna do a project, it's cool to bring a team like that together.
Word, and then that's Mulugeta Sarah, who was murdered in '88 in Southeast Portland, close to Laurelhurst Park, by members of Eastside White Pride. And his story is central to the podcast and the book.
And he's our beloved ancestor of the
That's
book,
right.
yeah. That's a comfortable looking outfit.
I'm not sure what,
For the live stream.
I know, right?
I'm not exactly sure what my question.
It's not, it's unmuted. Blue light should come on.
It's green.
Okay, that'll work. I think.
I can hear it now.
I hear you talking about a lot of philosophy, the curiosity, getting your body in there. What strategies do you use, and how does this come down from the 60s in terms of, I'm just trying to see, you said that there are some people that are willing to use violence. You started off by saying that. What really works? I mean, are you saying protests and show up as a person, and be willing to put your body in it?
That
I guess-
works if we have to look at things, we keep saying this term diversity of tactics. So different things work for different people depending on where they're at, what they're motivated and inspired to do, or what they absolutely have to do. So on one level of the front line, there are people who are emotionally, psychologically, spiritually oriented towards justice for the oppressed, and who want to be part of liberation movements because they can see that what's happening is wrong. And so they got to show up, and they got to get out there with their signs and block intersections and do nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience. There are also people who are literally being attacked. So there are people who, we talked in the podcast, neo-Nazis were doing drive-by shootings on their houses, right? There were lives that were lost, people were murdered. And that level of struggle is less about a protest and more about, if I don't get them, then I might not survive the night. So that's what happens as part of what we're confronting.
Okay, I didn't understand where you were going with the violence thing. Okay, I'm getting it now, okay.
And we don't know what works. It's just like we have to just keep trying different things until we can get the one thing that will work. And
Or
speaking
multiple
of,
things.
what's that?
Or multiple things.
Right, pushing forward on multiple fronts, like, somebody might do their work at a cocktail party, you know?
I'd say all of our tactics would be slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
Just even us sitting up here, just as an example.
It's important to know, so you asked about what carried over from the 60s. So for the beginning of my work as an anti-racist organizer and the beginning of me being politicized and starting to work in different formations with people in the national network and so on, that happened for me when I was a teenager. But that happened because I was responding to a threat from racial terrorists in my community. It was only after I responded to that threat in community with other people who we collectively and in coalition responded to that threat. Only after doing that did elders in my community intervene and teach me about what had come before me. So when Mo and I did the book tour in Chicago, there were people in their 80s and 90s that were present because they were part of the Sojourner Truth organization or the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee. Those organizations preceded our organization. But as I grew older, I started to meet these elder OG activists who were like, we did it that way too, but as we grew, we had to figure out different ways to do it. And I just want to say that consciousness and the development of understanding is also part of this work. So study circles and reading and studying history. There's an academic and intellectual side to the work because we have to understand the root cause of it beyond just our emotional response.
For someone like me, I feel like I'm still figuring out like my lane or what my tactics are. I didn't come to this kind of work until relatively late in life. So I think that there's time, I mean, that's relative, but there's no deadline to finding out where you fit in, where one fits in.
Two of the people that were really important to the Coalition for Human Dignity, which is one of the groups we talk about in the book, were Donna Redwing, and I can't remember Barbara's last name at this point, but this woman, Barbara, was from the 60s, and both Donna and Barbara have passed away. Donna Redwing was an organizer with the Lesbian Community Project, and Barbara came up through communism, and she did the books and was at every single meeting of the Coalition for Human Dignity. And that was invaluable to that group. She didn't have to necessarily do defense trainings or do house defenses where they sat in the houses of people that were experiencing drive-by shootings and tried to protect people. She just showed up every meeting and kept their books in order so that their nonprofit status was not in jeopardy. That's a way you can show up. That's a way you can show up. Donna Redwing took the message to multiple different groups because she was an ambassador from the queer community at the time. And she pushed that message out And both of those women died of cancer, so they're not with us anymore. And it's unfortunate that we couldn't include them. Stu, oh my gosh, my brain, I'm so sorry. One of the Yippies who was almost charged with the Chicago 7 in 1968, he was part of the Coalition for Human Dignity. So he carried that thread in. And he was a real elder to Jonathan Mazaki and other people from the Coalition for Human Dignity. Scott Nakagawa came through ACT UP, and he was a member of both ACT UP and the Coalition for Human Dignity. So a lot of it is about, like, Scott was trying to come of age as a gay man in the 90s, which wasn't safe at that time, and bringing that through into his liberation work with the Coalition for Human Dignity. So, and his advice was to just join something and bring your values with you when you go. And you don't, I mean, Response to Racism is a great example of it, but he was just like, join a bowling group, join a club, and just be in community with people. Because capitalism wants us to be isolated, by ourselves, miserable, alone, so that we'll continue to spend money. And being networked in community is a way to resist and continue speaking up. And when you talk about book clubs, I mean, people make fun of the book clubs, but when we went to Minneapolis, we were part of this celebration of the life of Mildred Fish Harnack, who was a Milwaukee woman who married a German scholar, moved to Germany, and then became a member of, as the rise of the Third Reich happened, she became a member of the Rote Kapelle, which was a German underground resistance movement. And what she did was she organized book groups, and they would read texts. And when she would notice somebody who was struggling with the regime, she would pull them aside and be like, perhaps you would like to read this more radical thing. And then she would siphon people from that group into the resistance movement and do the work in that way. So it's good that you're asking, and I think you'll find something inside yourself that will give you an answer.
A lot of what is chronicled in the book and the podcast also was centered in an underground subculture, the punk movement and the punk scene. And there were bands, there were music, there was venues, and there were kids who were going to see these bands play. And that's where the neo-Nazis did their organizing. And so that's where the response also came from in that scene.
Hello. This question's for Mike. I grew up in Oakland in the Bay Area in the late 80s, early 90s, and I was part of the Gilman punk scene, and there was a lot of what you were describing in Chicago was happening with us too. And then one of the biggest challenges was trying to figure out whether someone was a good skinhead or a bad skinhead. And it was like obviously I do like the laces they would wear, and there's all these little weird things. But I was curious, like, I was wondering why you think like the skinhead genre was sort of appropriated, or why that came about, or what value lied in that. I'm just curious what your opinion was of that.
So the history of the skinhead subculture is that it started in England in the late 60s, and then it came over from England to New York City and into the punk scene in New York City in the 70s. There were a couple of different iterations of the scene, but in the late 60s, the original scene was a multiracial scene, mostly black and white kids, because after World War II, there were Jamaican families that migrated to England, and they took with them their style, their music. And they intermix with working class kids in England. And so the mixture of the styles created the second wave of ska music, right? Which is a subgenre of reggae music. So ska, second wave coming out of England, it's white kids, it's black kids. The black and white checkerboard was like a symbol of that interaction, right? And so that was called two-tone. So that was the original skinhead movement. But in the 70s, we go into Thatcher England, there's austerity, there's economic issues, And there's, just like we see today, and we've seen it time and time again, there's scapegoating and xenophobia, where the establishment is pointing its finger at immigrants and people of color for the economic woes of England. And in that space, ignorant white kids who were working class or poor were directed to point their finger at people of color as the problem. Just like we see today with immigrants and Trump and so on and so on. So there was a section of the punk scene that was these working class white kids that were ignorant, that were angry and aggressive, who were being organized by the National Front, which is the equivalent of, say, Patriot Front, extreme right-wing group, and the British Movement, another extreme right-wing group in England. So by the time word of that became sensational in the media, because there was a lot of racist violence, they were attacking Pakistani immigrants, Muslim immigrants, attacking black people in England. By the time white boys over here started mimicking that, mainstream media picks it up. So by the time most people in America learn about skinheads, they're learning about the sensational white supremacist violence, because that was something that mainstream media highlighted. So 80s, we got Oprah, Sally Jesse Raphael, Donahue, Gerardo Rivera. All those guys had Nazi skinheads on their shows. The Oprah show in Chicago, there were many black skinheads at that show saying, "Let us on. Why are you only giving the stage to the neo-Nazis?" And Oprah wouldn't let them on because it was more sensational to highlight the racist Nazi skinheads. So there have always been anti-racist skinheads. There were anti-racist skinheads before there were Nazi skinheads. Now today, Nazi skinheads were attacked for being Nazis for many years. So they learned to change the way they look. And so now there's been a shift where most street-level fascist youth movement in the United States does not look like skinheads. They don't wear the skinhead uniform because they've been targeted for it.
And we are very willing to go have Oprah have Mike on the show and redeem herself for that. She has admitted that that was an error to have those folks on as guests. She made a mistake. And so if anybody here knows Oprah,
Holler at her.
anybody out there on YouTube knows Oprah, we feel like that would be great to have a little reconciliation. It's a perfect time for it. There's lots of, your comrades are still in Chicago, so we're just, I just kind of bring it up at every event.
Gotta put it out there.
Yeah, one of these
Yeah.
days, someone's gonna know Oprah and bring that in there. You can see one of the stills in the book is from that show. It's one of the, I think it might even be someone that you or Corky or them knows, speaking out against having those guys up on the stage. So if you do see somebody wearing the skinhead uniform today with the braces, they are probably an anti-racist skinhead because they keep
More
the
than
look.
likely, yeah. More
They
than
are
likely.
keeping the look.
Hi. This question is for all of you, but Mo, you mentioned how we tear each other down in activist spaces a lot. I'm just wondering how it looked back then. Like now we talk about transformative justice, community safety, and we have no idea what we're talking about, and we fail most of the time, and people get shut down, character assassinations, all these things. So I am new here, so I'm just wondering what the elders did in those situations and if they got as ugly as they seem to get today.
People today are quicker to be canceled because I think social media plays a role in magnifying and reinforcing things quicker and more profoundly than they were when things were just word of mouth. So that's unfortunate. I'm always encouraging people to talk to each other face to face, but sometimes, that's just not how people grew up. I think most of us have this experience before the cell phone and before social media. But a lot of young people who are active don't, you know, they're what we call digital natives. And it's hard to put out that fire once it gets going. You know, I don't necessarily have the solution except to just encourage people to talk things out in person and to keep our disagreements and our conflicts off of social media because they can be exploited. Yeah.
And also, Sarah Schulman wrote a book called Conflict is Not Abuse,
Yes.
that sort of addresses this both on she does it in 3 sections where she writes about interpersonal conflict and not weaponizing that, and then conflict between communities and the police, where it would be like, you go and ask your neighbor to turn the music down instead of calling the police on them. And then she actually, and this book came out in 2014 or something, and she was talking about Israel and Palestine as an example of that lopsided understanding of conflict versus abuse on a national level. And I would say in response, so that's one tool, to just read that book and understand that language. If you grow up in a way that's conflict averse, having an argument with somebody may misinterpret that as like, I'm being abused now. I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in a loud Irish family. We did a lot of yelling. And I remember getting in a conversation with someone, and I was surprised and frustrated, and I started yelling. And then I had to attend a mediation, and it was all over the community that was abusive. And I was just like, I was just yelling on the phone, you know, and
There you go again.
yeah, I know. Mike and I are gonna have to talk now. And another one also, I would like to say that as a Gen X person, I did not have mentorship as a young activist. When I organized, almost every person that was older than me shut me down, told me I was stupid, treated me in a sexist manner, dismissed me, could not recognize or honor my queerness. And as a result, and I'm taking that permission that I got earlier, I just was like, fuck you guys. You know, like, I mean, I didn't, and I characterize people as boomers. Now that's a division. So now I'm cutting myself off from decades of wisdom. And they're cutting themselves off from, like, I just had boundless energy. It did sometimes go in more than one direction, but that's something I'm really trying to acknowledge and pay attention to. And one of the things I appreciate about having that experience, even though it was hard to not have mentorship and to make mistakes that had been made in the same way for 100 years because I didn't have somebody to show me, lefty loosey righty tighty or whatever the weird little thing was, is that now when I encounter a younger person and I see them being enthusiastic in a way that I am now jaded about, and I start to go like, oh, don't get too excited about that. I hear the boomers in my head and I stop talking, which may be hard for you guys to believe, but I do stop talking. And I just like make space for the young people to be excited about whatever they're excited about and just try and be in their life. I am here. I'll watch your cat. Whatever, you know, like, the young anarchists are skittish. I've been, like, leaving food out for some that live down the street, and I finally am gonna be watching their cat while they're all at Mardi Gras right now. And this is something I've been working on for a year. So just like working vertically, organizing above your generation and below, adopting an elder and learning what you can, but also just like weaving elders into your life, weaving young people into your life, helping out young parents, you know, just like that's a place. When you asked earlier about like, how can I show up? I mean, make it possible for a young parent to go to a political meeting, because if you're in a place of trust with them and you could do childcare, you know, or do their chores for them or whatever. So those are the things that I have to say about the past. you know.
There's a couple comments from online, if I can read
Oh,
those.
great,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
let's hear it,
Okay.
Pam.
First of all, one of them is, thank you very much for this. And this is incredibly enlightening, thank you. And now for a question. What wisdom would you impart to youth who want to fight against oppressive systems? What is at least one big lesson you learned in your journey as a young person fighting against oppression? I guess those 2 questions.
I think this is not just for young people, but I think self-reflection and humility are very powerful things to embody, because we have to be able to say we're sorry when we're wrong. I think like compassion starts with being with humility and being able to acknowledge when we harm people. And if we can model that, then even though we wind up in these places where we're really vulnerable, it can allow other people to do the same thing, right? Because it's the self-righteousness that can become this toxic thing where people are unable to admit, you know, that maybe you fucked up, you know, and maybe there's a better way to do this. But in order for us to be able to hold each other through that, it has to be okay for people to make mistakes, you know? So it's like these interrelated things, yeah.
I would say to young people, just as a younger person, learn history, read,
Yeah,
watch things, learn, talk to people who are older than you.
thank you. And just to add to that, like the root cause, like when you read and when you study, like always be looking for the root cause of these systems of oppression, because they're all interrelated.
Where's the money? Where's the money? Follow the money and you'll find the problem. It's behind a lot of things. And as far as like a recommendation, I really recommend the book Me and White Supremacy, which is a workbook by Layla Saad for everyone, and it's extremely helpful. And like Mike said, learning how to say you're sorry, strength through vulnerability. If you can be vulnerable, you make space for someone else, and that's a risk. And then, you know, like if you're in a space and you are not getting the respect, like I stuck around in spaces for a long time when I could have been doing better work elsewhere, because I was really attached to my understandings and ideas about the friendships I was in, or I confused the political work with friendship. And I think that I had loyalty for, like, go where you are welcome. Go where you're welcome. And it may be a while before you find that place. And that's okay. It's okay as a young person or as any kind of person to try different things out. You don't have to do the same thing forever. Like, I was a protest activist for a long time, and then I developed PTSD thanks to the police and also some childhood stuff. So I had to shift and become a different person. Just be prepared to be resilient. Like, what do they say? The young people in the protest, be water. Be water. Be self-forgiving. I self-talk all the time. Like, I'll sit someplace and I'll all of a sudden have a wave of anxiety and be like, oh my God, Selena's really mad at me because I'm just not, and I'll have to stop and be like, you're a good person. Selena loves you. You love you. Everything's fine. Everything's okay. And I recognize, like, the times are tough. You know, it's very difficult to stay regulated right now. And so just use all your tools. Get therapy. Get therapy. Do something fun. Go swimming.
Yeah, have fun.
Have fun.
Yeah, make time for fun and naps. Yeah, for sure. There was a question over here.
Thank you all for being here. I'm curious, we know that street level violence increases when Trump is running for office and going into election year. I'm curious your reflections on lessons learned and gains made over the last 8 years of anti-fascist mobilization in this region, and perhaps lessons we still need to learn to be better prepared.
I keep seeing some lessons reinforced that were the same lessons that I saw, in the 80s and 90s. One of those is that when the Proud Boys or, Patriot Prayer, or whatever the extreme right-wing group shows up looking for a fight, they're always going to be protected by the police. And those who show up to fight against them are always going to be criminalized and take more losses than the extreme, right? And so after seeing that for years and years, I had to adjust what I thought of as effective. So I'm not gonna condemn those who choose to go fight the enemy at 3 o'clock, but if the enemy dictates the terms of the fight, is it really wise to engage on their terms? And that'll continue to happen. I think people get things confused. Right now with the current Israel-Palestine issue, this current genocide, there's a lot of enlightenment happening. There's a lot of confusion. Some people are getting pushed further to the right because they can't let go of their attachment to the belief that the Zionist state of Israel is the only safe place for Jewish people because the indoctrination has been so strong. A lot of people have been taught to be critical of that is to be anti-Semitic. So there's this dissonance that happens when we're critical of Zionism because we can see the raw fascism that it embodies. And some people just shut down. So it's a very tricky space to operate in, but we have to call it what it is. And to me, it's easy to see, like, if you're aligned with empire, then you're the problem. Anytime you're aligning with people who have $1 trillion nuclear capacity to annihilate everything on Earth, and who are getting away with wholesale murder, like, for months, that's not what we want to align with, right? And we can see in that space there are radical Jewish people, Jewish Voice for Peace, not in our name, every Jewish person I know, who is like, no, that's fascist, that's wrong. But there's a lot of saturation of propaganda, misinformation, and decades of indoctrination. So I just say that I'm not trying to derail what we're talking about. I see the interrelatedness of it all.
Just to piggyback off what you're saying in terms of gains, I think that a lot of people are waking up, and you see a lot of people talking about, well, not even just talking about, they say, and not to say who to vote for or whatever, or to vote or not to vote, but they say they're not going to vote, or they say they're going to vote for somebody other than the two parties. And I think that's really like an effort to make a change and just trying it out. Let's just see what happens. So I think that is a gain. They're trying something different.
One of the things we're seeing at Stop Cop City is a criminalization just of protesting, which is coming. And so one of the things that I definitely learned from participating in the WTO, which was, do you guys know about that in 1999? Okay, great, because I did talk to somebody recently who was like, what that? And I just cried a little. But was that, first of all, that extremely successful action was coordinated by many, many people for over a year. And it was like the Pacific Northwest was blanketed with flyers as early as September for this event that was happening at the end of November. So just like a long scale projection, rather than, I'll go on Instagram and it'll be like, strike tomorrow, all week. And I'm just kind of like, I respond initially with irritation, and then I have to look at my irritation and be like, what's my irritation telling me? And it's just like, I'm sad that I can't participate in a strike that I just found out about, and it's tomorrow. So that was a piece of information. The other thing is, like, at the WTO, that's the first time that I personally saw some tactics from forest defense or from some of the European defenses against, like, different actions over there of people locking down in intersections at the same time all over the city. So all these multiple targets, and that was really exciting, and it really felt amazing to win after like losing for years. And then in April, there was a huge, it was like there was like, I don't know if it was the Republicans or the Democrats got together to do something down there, and they were trying to have a big thing like the WTO. And they locked down in the intersections. And by that time, the police had figured out how to deal with that. And they dismantled them in no time, and that's when kettling of protesters was introduced. And so you have to change your tactics. If a tactic works in this situation, you can't just move it over. Like, we have to be, like, we don't have the minds of Annapolis helping us develop all the tactics. But like, if you do like Selena says, and you do a bunch of reading, and you think creatively, this could be a place, like, if you're just like, I've been a D&D dungeon master for 30 years, and I can imagine the scenario in which the activists can be deployed, like, use that! Use that! Use your D&D superpower. And on that note, I will say, something I've learned from 30 years of participating in this way is like, never underestimate the power of being ridiculous. Like, completely ridiculous in the face of fascism. They do not know what to do. Like, and that's like, you know, the girl putting the flowers in the barrels of the guns back in the 60s. And we were just talking about Reverend Billy and the Stop Shopping choir. You know, like, we were the Amalgamated Everlasting Union Chorus. And we would just show up and sing, and people just had no idea what to do with us. The left was confounded. The police had no idea. We chased people at the WTO in suits, screaming at them, you know, like, and we were dressed in tutus and wigs and weird outfits. Like, agitprop is fun, and it's fun. I mean, it also can be scary, you know, with this stuff, but.
Yeah, and art and media are very important tools, cultural tools that we can do, you know, bringing people together, listening to music, painting, whatever skills you have that you're inspired to do. One of the reasons that I, as a hip hop artist, engaged in social justice is because I love being an artist. And meetings are very boring. Butcher paper is boring. PowerPoint is boring. So I have to engage in a way that I'm going to be motivated to engage in.
I mean, if you walk outside your office and the whole thing is papered with beautiful posters that somebody put up in the middle of the night that declare liberation for all, and that's an action. That's an action.
And podcasting is as simple as having conversations in community with people you trust, and then making it available. You know, get somebody that, if you don't know how to edit, you know, there might be somebody in your community that does know how to edit. There's community organizations like KBOO Community Radio where you can learn how to produce radio for free. You know, there are organizations like Outside the Frame where young people can learn how to make film and video for free.
And that's a great way to include the elders and the infirm who still hold so much knowledge in history. And if you get their voices, I mean, that one of the valuable things about this book is like, it's capturing all the stories of these people the people who survived, not everybody did, while they're still alive, you know, and holding these stories and calling more forward. There's someone coming up behind you.
I guess it is hooked up. Got a curious question. I grew up in South Carolina. The history that I was taught in school was totally backwards. Came to Oregon schools weren't much better. Will there ever be a time and point that we can kind of undo and get people on the right track? Because I think a lot of the misunderstandings, a lot of ways that people are treated is based on poor history.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's very hard to get around that.
Yeah. I think, you know, books have been a big part of radicalizing me. When I say radical, I'm talking about orienting me to a root cause, right? There were elders, whether they were radical teachers and educators or activists and organizers, who were constantly intervening after a certain point because they saw what I was doing and they wanted to help me do it better. But a big part of that was putting certain books in my hand. Yeah.
And there is the curriculum on the Oregon Historical Society website. And there's not just our curriculum, there are other curricula that you can access that are free, that give high school credit in Oregon. But yeah, no, I think that if you make people ignorant and keep them that way, it's a way to control the population, because you're controlling the message. I mean, if you read Berlin Diaries by William Schreier, who was a journalist in Berlin as the Nazis were coming to power, and then after, it's interesting, he had to smuggle those diaries out. He was giving out radio reports every night, and he was dealing with the censors, but he was also keeping his own personal diary of what happened. And some of it was, I heard from my wife, the kid's doing this, but then also it was like, the difference between, he would talk about the news stories that went out about bombing the Polish village in order to bring Poland on board with the invasions, and the way that it actually happened. He's like, this is what happened, and this was the newspaper story. And that is happening now.
Yeah.
That is happening now. And so write your own histories down. Like, write down what's happening now and get that out as far as you can.
When we see a war on things like critical race theory, when we see journalists being murdered, libraries being shut down, and the censorship of social media, and the passing of laws that make it anti-Semitic to talk critically about state Zionism, then we know we're in fascism. And so our role becomes a role of propaganda and agitation through information. Dissemination of information that can orient us to a correct analysis of what's happening is really important. So we all have to play that role, even if it's just suggesting and sharing the right information with people.
And one of the places I get stuck in as an older person is wanting to transmit the information in a form that's comfortable to me. And I understand that there is like a big gap between me and a 20-year-old because of all the different technological differences that have happened just in that 30 years, 35 years, So if, I don't want to fall into the trap of being like, read the book, read the book, read the book. Because when we were in Corvallis a couple of weeks ago, there were kids who were saying like, I can't read. I don't read. They have really severe ADD, they can't read. And so I'm just like, it's cool. The thing about this project that's so awesome is like, we can say, listen to the podcast. Go ask your teacher to bring this into the school. Have a book club and invite one of us to attend. I mean, yeah, the book is available there's like some folks in Astoria that just finished reading the book, and I'm gonna go out there and get to meet with them and do an in-person book club visit.
This is important, what we're doing right now. Yeah, all of y'all being here.
You asked if we'll ever get on track. I think it's so important to be able to imagine that, to somehow see it in our minds in order to bring it to fruition through whatever means. But yeah, we have to be able to imagine it.
See, I bring that point up because I grew up in a family that was working on getting black people the right to vote. One of the things that had to happen was establishing literacy schools throughout the South, because there was a test that black people took to vote that white people didn't take. And that really created quite a few little problems here and there.
Yeah.
And J. Edgar Hoover was not a friendly person.
No. And you think about J. Edgar Hoover, one of the things I learned about him is that there's a understanding that he may have been a gay man who was dealing with some internalized severe homophobia. And so like, always look for the homophobia. Like Sarah Schulman, who I also she wrote a book all about familial homophobia, and I got to the end of that. And it's just kind of like right up there with corporate personhood. It's just, there are so many places where if gay people, queer people were invited to flourish from the minute we were born, that there is so much damage and hate that wouldn't even exist. If you think about if J. Edgar Hoover was loved as a man by men as he chose, Instead of rolling in his grave right now, just imagine all those people that would be alive now. COINTELPRO wouldn't exist.
We can't, I just gotta add on, critically and say that, being part of a marginalized identity that experiences oppression does not omit you from participating in fascism. There are black people who play active roles in fascist occurrences. President Obama was a fascist in his foreign policy, right? So he was a black president, but he was still murdering people. His immigration policy was still fascist. So I just want to make that clear. Identity is important. Oppression based on our marginalized identities and our efforts towards liberation, those things are inextricably linked. But when people choose to align with empire, this trick of representation where we go, oh, look, we have so-and-so from a marginalized identity on our board, but we're still doing fascism. Like, that's not okay,
I'm not condoning J. Edgar Hoover in any way.
Yes, you are.
I have an online comment.
Yes.
Thank you all for this experience and for the deeply rooted wisdom. And thank you to Respond to Racism and Bruce for bringing the space to our communities and making it accessible.
Aw.
Thank you, yeah.
In our community, I hate to be personal, but the school system no longer has a DEI committee. It's a culture of connection. And to me, it feels like when you just say connection, that both voices are the same. When there's a problem, they get equal weight, even though one person is being hurt more. Maybe you don't see it that way. I would like, is this happening everywhere that they're not using DEI anymore? Because I don't know why. Are you hearing this? I just think culture of connection is so bland.
I can't speak to that specific incident, but there is pushback, right? So for all the gains that are made from, a liberatory perspective, then there's often pushback from the mainstream that says, well, now we don't feel safe. And often the pushback from the right co-opts the language of the left. So people can say, well, we often, you'll hear people say things like, well, how come there isn't a White History Month? And you guys are racist because you're talking about slavery and things like that. So it's like one step forward, two steps sideways. But if you have a critical analysis that's rooted in understanding what the root cause of these systems of oppression are, you can always pivot and orient. But it's like, it takes a lot of energy to keep up with that. So our capacity sometimes isn't enough because the other side is more resource, right? So it's a dance.
And I would offer that anybody dealing with pushback like that, there's a podcast that's called Scene on Radio, and it's spelled SCENE. And the episode White Affirmative Action from, I just do a search for that one. He's got a few seasons, but there's one that looks critically at race in America. And the White Affirmative Action one really breaks down all the ways that white people have benefited from having land handouts all the way to the GI Bill, redlining, and those kind of examples. So it's a great podcast to get your talking points on, so that when somebody says like, oh, you just got this because you're from this marginalized group, and you could be like, well, what about all this land that you guys got, or this or that, so it's a real good one to have in response to that sort of thing.
So I got a question. In both the podcast and the book, you talk about pushing the neo-Nazis out of Portland, but then, they went other places, other peripheries. One, can you just talk about that a little bit more? But two, I'd be remiss. Part of the reason I think about this is because I think back in December, there was a bar, and I believe Gladstone hosted a toy drive for the Proud Boys. And, you know, between street level versus, again, someone like County Commissioner Mark Scholl pumping Islamophobia from that seat, it's just something that comes to my mind. So not to be too leading with that question, but yeah, could you just talk about that a little bit?
I think that education is always going to be, it'll never get old, because we're so steeped in white supremacy, in various forms of oppression that have to do with patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, misogyny. In this country, they're so central to, it's like people are born into this generational thing and learn things sometimes in ways that aren't even explicit. So you can stop the Proud Boys from having a toy drive, but then you're gonna have a commissioner, or you're gonna have a mayor, or you're gonna have a boss. It's everywhere, it's ubiquitous. So I say that to say that one of the most effective ways to combat this is to be able to inform generational consciousness through education, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's popular education in communities or on the street, or like I said, passing the book on to somebody and having conversations. Because ultimately, as our consciousness evolves, we're gonna be able to detect, oh, that guy is on the street and he's got a swastika, or he's kicking it with the Proud Boys and he's yelling, but actually the threat is systemic. He's really not even a threat. Like, as long as I don't engage him to where he holds physical, dominion over whether or not I get home safely, I can see him and just be glad I know exactly where he is, and I hope he keeps wearing his uniform, because I can identify him. But it's just stuff that's gonna prevent me from making it past a certain level in my career that I can't even identify, right? That's the real stuff. And that's the stuff that drives the power in this country. This is the stuff that's behind policy and laws.
Does that answer your question, Bruce?
Yes, thank you.
All right, good. I just want to make sure you're good.
Hey, thank you so much for being here. So I have a question about allies. I was wondering, in all of your experience with all your years of activism, if you have a technique for keeping allies engaged. Because in my experience, like say when the Proud Boys were being very visible in Gladstone, suddenly allies came out and they were everywhere like helping us out. But then when the Proud Boys, they're still around, but they stopped being as visible and the allies just kind of dropped off. And then in that time, I feel like that's where the space has been created where they dismantled the DEI, and some of the Proud Boys are now like officially part of the Clackamas County Republicans. They've run for seats and they've become a part of that. And I feel like we're coming at this like on the defense, trying to like figure out what they've just done and catch up with what they're dismantling. And I feel like that space might be happening where the allies drop off, but I don't know if I'm phrasing this properly, but I feel like we have big groups of people when there's an overt threat, then they don't see the threat and then they disappear. And then we need to have a big threat again for them to come out and like help us out, and then they go and they drop off again. Hasn't been your experience, or do you have a way to keep allies more engaged? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. You have a very rapid form of speech. That's all right. It's all right. I was just like, what's happening? It sounds like community building might be in order, and that's real old school organizing. Like, oh, you're an ally. Here's a name tag. Sign our email list. Here's a pastry. Like that kind of thing. And then just be like, we have a potluck every month for allies, for any questions. And even if you can get 2 people to come to that potluck, like that would be a way to keep that, I think, to address that sort of thing. Or like, is there something that you guys do that I can help out with? So you're weaving it back and forth. And a challenge to this, I mean, it's easy for me to sit up there here and tell you that, but as Mike said, like, as artists, like, I have 5 jobs. Like, that, 4 of them I get paid for. You know, like, it's just, I understand that people are under a lot of pressure. And the allies might be too. But those would be the things that and I'm not necessarily one of those old school traditional organizers, but those are the tools that I would use. Is just like the gratitude, try and collect information if people can give it, follow up with an email and a thank you of some kind, and then you know, talk to some of the organizers from, you know, like the different union organizers. Those guys are really good at that stuff. You know, just watching the Portland teachers go through their recent teachers strike and all the different ways that they tried to pull people in. Did that help you?
There's different levels to the work, and you know, Mo, you said earlier something about confusing political work with friendships. But what I'll say is that my most effective work has always been done with people I love, and I would die for the people that I seriously, you know, get down with, and they would do the same for me. But we always make sure that everybody gets home safe, right? So those are the dual tenets of our work. But without the trust, and then eventually, like if we've been through a lot and we shed blood together, there's this trauma bond. That can be unhealthy, but it can also be really healthy because we know that we can trust each other and rely on each other. So that's the core of like how I work with people. Like I have long-term relationships. I'm still best friends with everybody that's still alive from the work that I was doing in the 80s. But everybody doesn't get to do that, and that's not always present. So there's coalition work, there's affinity work, where you can't always know and trust people. But underlying all that is root cause and critical analysis, political education, so you understand the depth of the game that we're playing. So I fuck with my phone, because I wanted to look up the 14 words. How many people in here know the 14 words?
I know of them.
Yeah, I know
So
of them.
this is their credo, okay? We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. So what we're dealing with when we deal with the white supremacist spiritual orientation is we're dealing with the fear of genetic annihilation, right? So they're always talking about their blood. And this is centered to Republican Party politics in this moment, you guys, right? They're afraid that through miscegenation, they'll be fucked out of existence. And so they're engaged in a phallocentric war against humanity that threatens every species on the planet. That's exactly what we're dealing with. So our education and understanding of that allows us to make a choice. Do I want to align myself with that which is so in fear of everything in existence that it sees itself as this vulnerable minority that has to wage a war of extermination in order to exist? Or do I want to be like, let's figure out how to sustain life for all species in an ongoing way? So when we understand that, then this is a long game. And if people that I'm fighting with just think it's about getting somebody selected to be in a certain seat or getting a sign taken down, if that's all they're focused on, they're not going to last. So if I love that person and I have revolutionary unconditional love, part of my work is making sure that the people I'm with understand the nature, the depth of what our fight is.
I just wanted to hear that phrase again.
It would be
Revolutionary, unconditional love.
Yeah.
and
I love to say that. I love that you gave that to me.
it has to exist
It has to exist.
in the face of this, because look how simple this is. Look, their shit is, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. What if you took white out of there and just made it, we must secure an existence for the future of everybody's children,
Yeah,
right?
the 12 word, the
The 14,
the
the 14, yeah, the 13 word. Thanks.
Also, when your allies show up, if you make a goofy little zine and hand it to them that just says, thanks for showing up. We like you. This is the ways that we like you. We'd love to see you again. You know, here's how you can get in touch with us. You know, you get like a goofy little present, get some kids to color it. Everybody gets involved. What?
You're right. I mean, white power organized, they used to give kids beer. So I was just thinking of like the diversity of tactics, pizza, like chocolate.
Well, and that's a big piece of it. You know, it's just like
Right.
we talk about how this is like a meme on the, I get most of my news from memes, but this is like a meme where you've got the like, the left is, the right wing is just like, oh, what do you need? You need a job, you need food, you need money, you need housing, you need shelter, you need clothing. Come on in. Also, now you're a Nazi. And left wings is like, you're wearing the wrong clothes. You're reading the wrong books. What's the matter with you? You don't even have a job. It's just like meet people where they're at and provide them with what they need to the degree that you can, to the degree it does not hurt you. And by not hurt you, mean like take your naps, eat your foods, get your fun.
Meditate.
Do we have any more questions before we thank our speakers for this evening?
Yeah, I can't whisper because they'll hear.
I'm a student at Lake Ridge, and I'm wondering like what students specifically can do to organize against fascism.
Their teachers can bring us in.
Yeah, have your teachers bring us in.
And if they don't want to bring us in, the students can get the link to the high school curriculum from the website and say to their teachers, their social studies teacher, their histories teacher, civics, whatever, say, hey, this is something that we should be looking at. And if the teacher doesn't want to do it, then they can build community and get a group of their peers together and try to, more in a gentle way, you know, encourage the adults in the building to make space to talk about these things.
You can also go to your teachers and start like an anti-fascism club.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Find a teacher that's just like, who's against fascism? Find the gay teachers. Find the teachers that are with you. And then just be like, I'd like to start a club to end fascism. Like, that's a thing. You know, maybe it would be cool.
Or like Scott Nakagawa said, just join a group and bring your full authentic self there and discuss.
And he was pretty clear. He's like, don't show up and don't show up and proselytize. Like, just show up and be your authentic self. And if there's something that's happening that is keeping you from being your authentic self, speak up. You know, and if you don't know how to speak up, ask a friend to stand with you. And then that's what Mike did. That's what Mike and his friends did. You know? Thanks for speaking up. Thanks for asking.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I have another answer to that question.
Erin.
Is that you and your friends are the people that are being targeted by the white nationalists. Like they're going to try to turn you, and we don't know what their tactics are because they're not trying to turn us. And when they were trying to turn us, they would show up at our punk shows and they would buy us the beer and they would do all that stuff. And I don't know if that's what they're still doing too. So if you get targeted, if your friends get targeted, if you know anyone that's getting targeted, if you can tell us what's happening, then that will help so much because we don't know, and you're on the ground, and you're fighting the fight, and you're just being here, you're doing great. But if you can share the information with us, that would be really awesome.
And you can do that by writing us at itdidhappenherepodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, larger community, connect with folks.
And that's Aaron Yankee. Thanks, Aaron. I think like every single person has asked a question.
So one last chance. Any final questions? If not, first, could we just give a round of applause for Selena, Mike, Mo, and Aaron. Also, I want to just, thank LOUCC and the volunteers, Pam in the booth, Mina in the back. Also want to thank another Lake Ridge student, Sienna, for running the mic tonight as well. It's a community effort. Yeah, and with that, we, again, visit the merch table out by the refreshments. If you're watching online, it's itdidhappenhere.com. Can you plug it in?
It did happen here, podcast.com.
Itdidhappenherepodcast.com. Listen to the podcast, buy the book, support.
And if anybody online wants to donate, we are raising money tonight for our spring tour that Mike and I are taking the book to Atlanta and other points in the southeastern states. And that goes into my Venmo at Mo Bowstern, MoeBowstern. And if you just use a little emoji, like with the flame, I'll know that it's for the tour.
Awesome.
Just in case Oprah's out there and wants to dump a bunch of apology money into our tour.
Yes, Oprah, if you're watching. Okay. So thank you all again for being here tonight. Again, we have refreshments in the back, and this has been our community meeting for February.
Good job, guys. Good job.